Michael Kent paced the dimly lit hallway of his father's old office, his footsteps muffled by the faded carpet. The scent of old paper and stale coffee hung in the air, a reminder of the legacy he'd inherited. Sky High Airlines, once a shining beacon in the aviation industry, had become a company plagued by controversy and toxic workplace culture. His father, Henry Kent, had built the company from the ground up, but had lost sight of its most important asset, the people who kept it running. After Henry's unexpected death, the company had fallen into Michael's hands. He hadn't spent years preparing for this moment. He had spent them watching, listening, and staying in the background. He knew the airline was teetering on the edge of collapse, not because of financial ruin, but because of rot spreading from within. Employees were disgruntled. Customer complaints were at an all-time high, and certain toxic individuals were poisoning the entire culture. Michael had decided to confront it in his own way. Instead of entering the boardroom and barking orders like a dictator, he would observe the company from within. He needed to see what passengers saw, feel what employees felt, and experience what had been neglected for years. That's how he found himself dressed in a plain suit, holding a worn leather briefcase, standing at gate 23 waiting to board a flight under an alias. He handed his boarding pass to a tired-looking gate agent who scanned it with a hollow smile. "Have a nice flight, sir," she murmured. He nodded, noting the exhaustion in her eyes. How many hours had she worked without a proper break? Did her manager even notice? The jet bridge was cold, the metallic hum of the aircraft vibrating through the floor. He took a deep breath, steadying his nerves. The moment he stepped into the plane, his eyes met the steely gaze of Patrick Doyle. Patrick Doyle was everything the employee reports had described: tall, with graying hair and a smirk that reeked of condescension. He was a senior pilot, respected for his skills in the cockpit, but notorious for his treatment of colleagues. Reports of belittling remarks, racial prejudice, and unchecked arrogance were stapled across his personnel file. Somehow, he had skated by for years, shielded by a network of complacency and seniority. Doyle's eyes narrowed as he scanned Michael up and down. "New passenger, huh?" he drawled, his voice low and derisive. "Let's see what kind of guy you are." Michael didn't respond, just offered a small, polite smile and stepped forward. Doyle wasn't done. "Hope you don't get lost in this big old cabin, pal," he sneered. "We're all important people here, you know." A few passengers exchanged uneasy glances, some chuckling awkwardly, others pretending not to hear. Michael's grip on his briefcase tightened, his jaw clenching. He fought the urge to snap back, to reveal who he was right then and there. But this wasn't the time. He kept walking, focused on the plan. He found his seat in economy class, the narrow, cramped space, a stark reminder of how comfort had been sacrificed for profit margins. As he settled in, his thoughts swirled. How many of his employees felt the same squeeze of neglect? How many passengers regretted choosing Sky High Airlines? Before he could lose himself in thought, a shadow loomed over him. Doyle was back, that smug grin plastered on his face. Without warning, he snatched the briefcase off Michael's lap. "What's this?" Doyle said loudly, drawing the attention of nearby passengers. "A secret suitcase? Got something important in there." "Huh." Gasps filled the cabin, and several phones were lifted, cameras recording the scene. Michael's heart pounded, but he kept his expression calm. "That's illegal," he said quietly, his voice firm and steady. "Give it back." But Doyle wasn't listening. He popped the latch and began rifling through the contents. Papers rustled until Doyle's hand stopped cold. His face paled as he pulled out a single sheet and read it. It was a termination notice. His termination notice. Signed by Michael Kent. Doyle's fingers trembled as he realized what he was holding. His eyes darted to Michael, confusion and disbelief etched on his face. Michael leaned back in his seat, meeting Doyle's eyes with unwavering resolve. "I'm the new owner of this airline," he said evenly. "I've heard enough about your behavior. And you know what, Patrick? You're fired. The conversation is over." The silence that followed was deafening. Doyle's jaw fell open, his bravado crumbling. Passengers stared, eyes wide with astonishment. The cabin door opened and two flight attendants stepped forward, their faces a mix of apprehension and relief. "Mr. Doyle," one of them said gently, "please come with us." Doyle's mouth worked soundlessly, his eyes pleading with anyone who might defend him. But no one spoke up. The flight attendants guided him down the aisle, the clack of his shoes on the metal floor echoing through the cabin. The door closed behind him, and for a moment, the plane was utterly still. Then, someone started clapping. The sound was hesitant at first, then grew louder as more people joined in. Applause rippled through the cabin, a wave of relief and approval. Michael exhaled, his shoulders sagging slightly. It was done, the first step, but he knew this was just the beginning. The video taken by passengers spread across the internet like wildfire. Within hours, news outlets picked up the story. Clips of Doyle's humiliation, Michael's quiet resolve, and the applause of the passengers flooded social media. The incident sparked debates about workplace ethics, airline management, and leadership accountability. For Michael, the confrontation wasn't about making headlines. It was about sending a clear message. The old ways were over. Toxic behavior, prejudice, and arrogance had no place in his company anymore. But he also knew that one public firing wouldn't fix the deeper issues at Sky High Airlines. In the days that followed, Michael called emergency meetings with his leadership team. There were no pleasantries, no small talk. He laid out his vision clearly. Respect, inclusivity, and integrity would be the new pillars of Sky High Airlines. Anyone who couldn't adhere to that vision was free to leave. Not everyone took it well. Some managers resisted, clinging to the old culture that protected people like Patrick Doyle. But Michael was relentless. He met with flight attendants, ground crew, mechanics, and customer service agents. He listened to their grievances, their frustrations, and their hopes. He promised them change, and he meant it. He implemented new training programs, focusing on diversity, sensitivity, and customer care. He set up anonymous hotlines for employees to report misconduct without fear of retaliation. He replaced outdated policies with ones that prioritize fairness and transparency. It wasn't easy. Change never was. Some employees left unable or unwilling to adapt. Others embraced the reforms, relieved that someone was finally listening. Slowly, the atmosphere in the company began to shift. Smiles became more genuine. Conversations became more respectful. Trust, long broken, started to mend. Passengers noticed a difference, too. Complaints dropped. Positive reviews surged. Sky High Airlines, once a symbol of dysfunction, began to rebuild its reputation. Michael knew there was still a long road ahead, but for the first time in years, he felt hope. Not just for the company, but for the people who made it fly. And he knew his father, despite his flaws, would have been proud.